A hopeless freehand, and he got so frustrated that he fantasized about using light-sensitive chemicals, as he put it, to cause these natural images to imprint themselves durably and fixed upon the paper.
He started experimenting as soon as he returned to Laycock Abbey, but he wasn't the only one dabbling in photography.
Louis-Jacques Mondet Daguerre produced his daguerreotypes, which were on silver-coated copper, and they were announced at the French Academy of Sciences on the 7th of January, 1839.
The problem with the daguerreotype was that you couldn't make copies. All that you got was a single picture on a copper plate, not really very convenient.
Stung into action by the news of the daguerreotype, Henry Talbot, that's what he called himself, rushed off to London and announced to the Royal Society his art of photogenic drawing. And almost certainly the first photograph he showed them was of this window, one of the oriel windows here at Laycock Abbey. And he took the picture with a camera very much like this. In fact, this is a replica of it. And you see it's terribly simple. It's just a wooden box with a lens in the front. And he almost certainly pinched the lens from one of his microscopes. Now, he probably put the camera on the mantelpiece. There used to be a mantelpiece where this cabinet is now, and that would be square onto the window and at about the right height. And because I'm here, I can't resist trying to take a picture of the window myself. And I have here one of the cameras that was actually made for Henry in 1842. It's a portrait camera, so it's not designed for taking pictures of windows, but I should get something. And I've got in here some light-sensitive paper, rather like his, so it's not terribly sensitive, and I have been exposing this for about half an hour. Let's just see what I've got.
Modern photographs have to be developed and printed. But Talbot was using paper on which the image actually appeared inside the camera during the exposure.
But it's all the wrong way round. That is, the window, the glass is all dark and the stone is all white. It's what he would call a transfer, and we would now call a negative.
Talbot's paper was made sensitive to light by soaking it in a solution of silver salts. Wherever the light hit the paper, it would turn the silver salt into silver metal, which appears dark.
Talbot realised that he could use this as the subject for another photograph, so that that would be a negative of a negative, in other words, a positive. Or rather, as he put it, it would return the lights and the shadows to their correct dispositions.
The ability to make many prints from one negative was Fox Talbot's first contribution to modern photography. I've put my negative in a frame with another piece of light-sensitive paper and left them in the sun.
And with luck, I'll have a nice positive print. There! Look at that! Oh yeah! Hey! You can see all the glass is now bright as it should be and the stonework's dark. I made a positive print.
Talbot employed a large staff to make hundreds of copies of his photographs. His first book of photographs was called The Pencil of Nature and was published in 1844.
Every picture in The Pencil of Nature is either a landscape or a still life. The problem is that the exposures were enormously long, like an hour and a half, and you obviously couldn't get people to stand still for that long.
So he came up with a completely new, quicker process. He used more sensitive paper, and he didn't wait for a picture to appear in the camera.
And the new process was called the calotype process. Now, I want to take a picture of me, so I've set up this camera trained on that chair there in the doorway, which is where he took one of his famous photographs.
The new process was 60 times faster than the old one, so I only have to sit here for about 30 seconds. I've brought my dark slide into the dark room, and with just these red lights, I'm quite safe. I can take out the sensitive paper because it's not sensitive to red light. Now, there's practically no image there, and this was the secret of his calotype process. Talbot accidentally discovered that his photographic paper was working much faster than anyone had realised. He found that although the human eye couldn't see it, the action of light on the paper was almost instantaneous, producing an invisible chemical image. And the way he developed it was to paint it with a mixture of chemicals that he called his exciting solution. So I'm slopping that on now with my buckle brush, and it's developing quite nicely. Yeah, look, that's me appearing before my very eyes. After developing his prints, Talbot used acid to fix them so that they wouldn't go black in daylight. This is how photography works today. He took out a patent in 1841 and aggressively defended it in the courts. Unfortunately, he also patented a whole lot of things that other people had invented, and this held back the progress of photography for many years. Henry Talbot was an eminent mathematician, a competent astronomer and a brilliant linguist. He also took the world's first photograph with flash in 1851, but what he'll be remembered for is the calotype process. I have mixed feelings about the man, but there's no doubt that he put together the three basic processes of developing, fixing and printing, and that's why he's called the father of modern photography. In the 18th century, quintessential British life was rather different. In particular, tea and scones on the lawn simply weren't possible for the middle classes because only the super rich had lawns. However, right here at Phoenix Mills in Stroud, my next hero changed all that because he invented the lawnmower. His name was Edwin Beard Budding. Edwin Beard Budding was born in 1795, probably in Bisley in Gloucestershire. He's such an unsung hero that there's no known picture of him. At Blenheim Palace, they actually employed 50 men with scythes simply to mow the grass. They were called the mowers. The trouble with a scythe is you need a very sharp blade and you need to hit the grass very fast, because if you go slowly, it simply pushes the grass down and the grass springs back again, uncut. What's more, unless you're experienced, it's very hard work and you simply dig up the lawn. Budding's solution was to prevent the grass from bending by trapping it between two blades. But obviously you couldn't cut the whole lawn just with a pair of scissors, so he wanted to make a machine to imitate the action of the scissors. Cutting a single blade of grass is easy because it's thin and weak, but cutting a whole lot is a whole lot more difficult. Budding realised what he wanted to do with his machine was cut a load of grass one blade at a time. So he invented a machine with two blades, one fixed and the other rotating on a drum. This is my grass. It's just a bit of green notepaper. It sits behind a straight stationary blade. See what happens when I try to cut my grass using two straight blades. Well, it cut one blade of grass. Completely useless. You can see that the grass just bends over instead of being cut, just as it did with a slow-moving scythe. Budding's brilliant innovation was a curved blade which ran the full width of the rotating drum. It's cut every single blade. Let's just see that again in slow motion. The point of contact between the two blades moves along, cutting the blades of grass one at a time. Budding found that a curved blade was the perfect solution and patented his first lawnmower in 1830, and I've managed to find one. Look at this beautiful machine. This is an original Budding lawnmower designed 170 years ago. And here are the curved blades which you can still see on practically every lawnmower. And the extraordinary thing is, it's still cutting grass today. One of the earliest machines went to the Regent's Park Zoological Gardens, where the foreman, Mr. Curtis, was delighted. He said, it does as much work as 6 or 8 men with scythes and brooms, and performs the whole so perfectly as to leave no mark of any kind behind. In the late 1830s, Budding moved to Dursley. In 1846 he died of a stroke, and his name's almost forgotten. But without his brilliant invention, the cricket pitches, the bowling greens, and the lawns of our green and pleasant land simply wouldn't exist. Until the 17th century, most people thought that light travelled infinitely fast, so that its speed was impossible to measure, although the great Galileo spent some uncomfortable nights up an Italian mountain with a lantern trying to do it. I've come here to Chalford in Gloucestershire to celebrate the first man who did manage to find out how fast light travels, James Bradley. James Bradley was born in 1693 in Sherborne, Gloucestershire. His uncle, the Reverend Pound, was a fanatic astronomer, and pretty soon James was hooked on stargazing. In 1725, Bradley was trying to work out the distance to the nearest stars by looking for a shift in their position. Let me show you what I mean. Suppose I look at that tree there and my finger in front of my face, and then I cover up my left eye, then my finger is just to the left of the tree. But if I cover up my right eye, then my finger has jumped right across the tree. It's about 10 yards. And the reason for that is my two eyes give me two different viewpoints. Now, the Earth goes in a huge orbit round the Sun, and Bradley reckoned if he looked at the stars from one end of the Earth's orbit and then from the other, he should see two different points of view. So he expected to see the nearest stars shift against the background of distant stars like my finger shifts relative to the tree. Bradley made his first observation on the 3rd of December 1725. He was looking at Gamma Draconis, a bright star in the Dragon constellation. He saw the star as he expected. He had another look 2 weeks later on the 17th, and the star had indeed moved, but he was absolutely amazed because it had moved far more than he expected, and what's more, in the wrong direction. He'd taken into account the movement and rotation of the Earth, and he knew that the star couldn't be moving the wrong way through space, so he had a problem. The solution finally came to him in September 1728, when he was on a boat on the Thames. He noticed that the flag on the boat was blowing first in one direction and then in another, and he asked the boatman, "Does the wind really change direction so much?" And the boatman said, no, it's not the wind that's changing direction, it's the boat changing direction and speed, and as a result, the apparent wind seems to be coming from there and so on. Let me show you. Look, I've got a flag here. We're going very slowly, and the wind appears to be coming from the port beam, absolutely straight across the boat. But if I go a bit faster, it immediately appears to be coming from nearer the bows. And if I go to full speed, I get a wet bottom. And the wind now seems to be coming from over the bow. On land, this wind seems fairly constant, but to someone sitting on a moving boat, it seems to change direction. Bradley realised this and suddenly saw that the same thing must be happening with the light coming from the stars. Bradley lived here at St Mary's Mill in Chalford. This is a little bit of starlight. Now imagine that I'm looking at a star straight overhead and the light from the star is going to come vertically down into my eye. I shall use this telescope with my eye at the bottom, so the starlight will fall straight down into my eyeball. Bradley wanted to do just that, but his telescope was mounted on the Earth, and the Earth moves through space. Now here is the starlight poised to drop vertically, and just look what happens when the telescope moves through space. The light bashes into the side of the telescope and never reaches the eye. And in order to see his star overhead, Bradley had to look in a different direction. Something like that. Now, watch. You would have thought that if you have to point your telescope that way to see the star would actually be in that direction. But that's only the apparent direction of the star, like the apparent direction of the wind. In fact, the star was straight overhead. Now, the discrepancy that Bradley measured was much, much less than mine, but he called it the aberration of light. Bradley worked out that light travels 10,000 times faster than the Earth, and that light from the Sun reaches the Earth in 8 minutes, 13 seconds. He had set out to find the distance to the nearest stars, and instead discovered the speed of light, a landmark in astronomy. And the precision and simplicity of his theory were a perfect reflection of the man himself. I've come to Barnwood near Gloucester to celebrate the musical exploits of a man who was famous for his electrical experiments.
He was the first to patent the electric telegraph, and if you've studied electricity, you've probably heard of the Wheatstone Bridge. Well, he didn't invent either of those, but he did invent the concertina. He was born right here at the Manor House, and his name was Charles Wheatstone.
Charles Wheatstone was born on the 6th of February 1802. His father ran a music business in Gloucester, and so sound and music captured his imagination. This was his dad's shop, W. Wheatstone and Company, music publishers and manufacturers of woodwind instruments since 1750.
In 1821, Wheatstone began some serious research into sound and how it works. He knew sound is linked with vibrations, so he began to classify them. In order to investigate vibrations, Wheatstone invented this, the kaleidophone, which is really just a sequence of metal rods jammed into a wooden base, and each rod has a metal bead on the end. Now, when you twang them, you can actually see the vibrations, so what I need is just an overhead spotlight. And have a look at this, give it a twang.
He noticed that when he struck the rod in different places, it produced different patterns. He also played the rod with a violin bow, and found that the higher the note, the more intricate the pattern. Wheatstone used the kaleidophone to show people that a simple sound was made of intricate vibrations.
Now this one can vibrate only in 2 dimensions, but this one down here has got a bend, so it can go not only horizontally but also vertically, and you get some fascinating 3-dimensional vibrations out of it. Now he first demonstrated his kaleidophone to the Royal Institution on the 4th of May 1827. The main discourse of the evening was given by the director, Dr. Michael Faraday, who was an absolutely brilliant lecturer, and he was followed by Dr. Granville, who opened a mummified cat. Now, I wouldn't have wanted to follow that, and nor did Wheatstone. He begged Faraday to give his lecture for him, and Faraday did because he was so impressed by the young scientist-musician. Now, there is another version to that Royal Institution story, which is that Wheatstone didn't just ask Faraday to give his lecture, he actually ran away, and Faraday had to give the lecture to keep the audience happy. And ever since then, the Royal Institution lecturer has been locked in for an hour before his talk so that he couldn't do a Wheatstone. He used his knowledge to invent 2 completely new musical instruments, and this was the first of them, the symphonium, covered in his patent of 1829. Now it's really just a mouth organ with buttons, and you blow in this mouthpiece here. Let me show you how to make beautiful music. Or something like that. And the way it works is quite simple. You can slide the front off, and behind it you can see the reeds. And you see that the way you get sounds is to blow over the reeds. When you press a button, it allows the air to flow over the end of one of the reeds, and the reed vibrates in the airstream, and that makes the note.
A bit like the vibrating metal rods of the kaleidophone.
And the buttons are arranged for easy playability. It's very cunning, some at that end and some at this end. The trouble with this, beautiful though it is that you had to blow, so you couldn't make very long notes. And also, of course, you couldn't sing, which is a great pity. So then he used the same principles in this, the concertina. Now this is a really lovely instrument. And you can see I don't have to blow at all because all the air comes from the bellows. He was also very cunning in arranging that you got the same note whether you pushed the bellows or pulled, so that you could get enormously long notes without any trouble at all. Now, to make it a really useful instrument for serious musicians, he had to pack in an awful lot of notes. There are 24 buttons at that end and 24 at that end, 48 in all, giving you 4.5 octaves, and that means you can play absolutely anything with this. Now, to pack all those notes in, he had to adopt a very cunning arrangement, and what he did was to put all his reeds radially. Do you see in each of these slots there's a reed? The reeds themselves are very like the ones on the symphonium. And because they're symmetrically arranged, they all got the same airflow, which was very cunning, and it made a most beautiful instrument. And as a result of this, C. Wheatstone and Company made arguably the best concertinas for 150 years.
In 1834, Wheatstone began the research on electricity that made him famous. He tried to measure the speed of electricity using miles of wire and a curious machine with spinning mirrors to see the spark. He found that electricity was very fast, and he realised it would be ideal for long-distance communication. In 1837, he patented the electric telegraph, and with William Fothergill Cooke, made it available to the public. Wheatstone didn't actually invent telegraphy. It had been successfully tried at least 20 years before. There were years of legal wrangles because Wheatstone seemed to have borrowed some ideas from other people. What's curious is that Wheatstone is remembered for the Wheatstone Bridge, an electrical circuit that he didn't invent, rather than for his original contributions to the science of music. My next hero began his life at Breda in the Netherlands and ended it here at Bowood House near Caen in Wiltshire. He was a brilliant doctor and scientist, and yet nobody remembers his name now. He fought smallpox, he refined microscopy, and most amazing of all, he discovered the process by which plants make oxygen, photosynthesis. His name was Jan Ingenhousz. Jan Ingenhousz was born on the 8th of December 1734. His interest in science started when he met a British Army doctor, John Pringle. Pringle saw a spark of intelligence in Ingenhousz and in 1764 invited him to London. Pringle had married one of the daughters of Dr. William Oliver of Bath, who invented the Bath-Oliver biscuit. He'd become president of the Royal Society and personal physician to George III, and so he was able to introduce Ingenhousz to a lot of important people, including Benjamin Franklin and Joseph Priestley. In the year 1774, the great Dr. Joseph Priestley was here at Bowood as librarian and carrying on his researches into oxygen. He probably discovered it a couple of years earlier in Leeds. Unfortunately, he called it dephlogisticated air, which was hardly a catchy name. Anyway, among the things he discovered, probably in this very room, this was his lab, were that if you took a candle and you put it under an upturned jar, then after a bit the candle went out. And the air inside the jar is foul. You can't breathe it. Animals couldn't live in it. But you could revivify this air by putting plants in. So there was obviously some connection between animals, plants and the air, but Priestley never did manage to work out the details. Ingenhousz solved the problem in the summer of 1779. In 4 months, he did more than 500 experiments, and he wrote them all up in a wonderful book called Experiments Upon Vegetables. This is what he did. He took a whole lot of plants and put them under water. I've got here some pondweed, Elodea densa. But any green plant will do. And if you look very carefully, you can see that on some of the leaves there are bubbles, and indeed in some places there are actually streams of bubbles rising to the surface. Now, Priestley had shown that you can revivify air by putting plants in, so obviously these bubbles are of some interest. Many people had seen them, and there were lots of rival theories as to what they were and what caused them. And eventually, he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was the light from the sun falling on the surface of the leaves that was generating the gas. He wanted to find out what the bubbles of gas were. So he collected some in an upturned jar and tried one of Priestley's simple tests. Now, just watch what happens when I plunge a smouldering taper into that unknown gas. It catches fire, you see. So it is oxygen, Priestley's dephlogisticated air. And that is what the plant leaves are generating under the action of sunlight. He was famous for his skill at smallpox inoculation. He travelled throughout Europe, treating rich royals, and was lucky to escape from Paris on the day that the revolution started. One of the great philosophical conundrums of the time was, where do plants come from? You've got all these flowers and leaves and stems and trees. Where does all this stuff come from? The obvious answer is that it must come up from the soil through the roots. Well, Ingenhousz's work showed that the real answer is not what you might expect. I've got here a plastic container and a bit of kitchen towel, and I'm going to fold this up and put it in, And I'm going to add exactly 1 level tablespoon of water, like that. And then 1 level teaspoon of cress seed, like that. And then I'm going to put the top on. And you'll notice that there's a hole in the top so that the air can get in or out. I did exactly the same thing a week ago, using the same sort of container, 1 sheet of paper towel and so on, and this is what I've got. I've got a lovely luxuriant growth of cress in there, all steamy and wonderful because it's still growing. Here's my balance, and first I'll put on the fresh one, and then I'll put on the one that's been growing for a week. I'll hold them level, and then there, you see, this one is significantly heavier. Now, that's not entirely surprising because after all it is full of grown cress. But where has the extra mass come from? It's a sealed container, and the only way anything could have got in is through the hole in the lid. And the only thing that could have got in is air. So effectively, that cress must be solid air. And that means that all these flowers and leaves and stalks and trees, even wood, must be effectively solid air. We now know that plant material is mainly water and carbon, and the carbon comes from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In some ways, Ingenhousz was lucky. He was lucky to escape from Paris on Bastille Day, and he was lucky that in his youth he met an army doctor. But it wasn't luck, it was sheer brilliance that led him to sort out the process of photosynthesis, which powers all of life on Earth. Sorry, that's all the heroes from this part of the world. See you next time! I'm on my way to Hunter Street in London's West End to celebrate my first heroine, whose work was inspired by a seller of ice cream. She was then professor at what was the London School of Medicine for Women, and her name was Mary Waller. Mary Desiree Waller had a good scientific pedigree. Her father had invented the electrocardiogram and a lie detector, so she probably never got away with any childhood fibs. She started as a demonstrator in physics in 1912, and her rise was meteoric. By 1915, she was head of department. But the real breakthrough came in 1932, when a man came to the door of the building to sell ice cream. Now, he used to use dry ice to keep his ice cream cold, and he came to her with a question. He said, "When I take a piece of dry ice, a curious thing happens when I touch it on the bell of my bicycle." Now, let's just try this. It's funny stuff, dry ice. It's actually frozen carbon dioxide gas. And it's called dry ice because if you let it warm up, it doesn't leave a puddle. Ordinary ice, when you melt it, it leaves a puddle of water. But if you look at this stuff, and you can actually see the gas coming off it, but it never gets wet. It stays dry, dry ice. Mary realised that the noise must be produced as a result of the gas coming off the dry ice. When she touched it on the metal, the gas pushed the dry ice away from the metal, and then it bounced back as soon as the gas escaped. And because it was going very quickly, it was bouncing up and down and making the metal ring. This is the very building where she did all her research on vibrations and sound. And in order to see the vibrations she was studying, she used a trick invented in 1787 by a German lawyer called Ernst Chladni. What he did was to sprinkle sand on metal plates and then make them vibrate like this.